He prowled the streets of South Korea in pursuit of his own selfish deeds. But what lengths would one be willing to go in order to achieve their desires? And if brazenly inhumane, how long can these acts go undetected? My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at a case that's barely known in the Western world, but is notorious in its home country. Kang Ho-Sun had always treated women like dirt, but in the year 2015, he would embark on an unthinkable journey that would end the lives of 10 innocent women. And many locals in the area now refer to him as the Ted Bundy of South Korea. So, who is this evil man? How did he get away with murder 10 times? And who are his undeserving victims? But before we get into it, I wanted to thank Noom for sponsoring today's video. To those of you who've been here for a while will know that I've been using Noom for several months now. And being real with you, it's been instrumental in helping me keep in good shape, especially through those winter months. Noom is not a diet. It's a digital health platform that uses science, psychology, and cognitive behavioral therapy to help you achieve a healthy yet sustainable and enjoyable lifestyle. Noom teaches you how your mind works with food, and the reasoning behind the decisions that you make, because learning and not dieting is what leads to real, lasting change. Outside of its courses, I also use Noom to record my water and calorie intake, measure my eating habits, and track my body composition. I am also much more alert and feel a lot better about myself than I used to. If you're ready to create some new habits that can help you reach daring new milestones this year, then take your free 30-second quiz today at noom.com/coffeehousecrime. Or click the link in the description to get started now. That's noom.com/coffeehousecrime. Now with that said, pull up a seat, grab a coffee and sit back. This is the case of Kang Ho-Sun. Our story today takes us over to East Asia, to the bustling country of South Korea. When you think of South Korea, the vibrant city of Seoul often springs to mind. Seoul is South Korea's capital city, and over half of the country's population live here within its national capital area, also known as the Gyeonggi region, a densely crowded metropolis which is rich in culture and business. Very reminiscent of a kaleidoscope, Seoul features futuristic skyscrapers, which rise like monoliths above luscious parks and clean streets. And found on the outskirts of Seoul, we encounter Kang Ho-Sun. Ho-Sun lived in the southern area of Gyeonggi region, and although living here as an adult, Ho-Sun was actually born 100 miles southwest in the rural town of Sikomyeon, a tiny town basically out in the middle of nowhere. Born on the 1st of March 1970, Ho-Sun had a relatively normal upbringing. There was nothing extraordinary about him. He was the third of 5 siblings, and living in rural Korea, Ho-Sun attended an agricultural high school, where his family had hoped that he would stay in the area after he graduated. Before graduating in 1989, Ho-Sun was described by teachers as having a neat appearance with a sincere disposition. And although his education went relatively well, he couldn't find any passion in local work around his hometown. And so, much to his parents' dismay, he seemed to stagnate after graduating, instead taking the easy path and working for his family. This lack of ambition was in fact so apparent that instead he enlisted into the South Korean military, taking the role of a non-commissioned officer, a position that involves working within the military. However, this role would be brief. As in true country boy fashion, Ho-Sun was dishonorably discharged after he was caught stealing cattle while on vacation, thus ending his military career less than 2 years after joining. In the years following 1991, Ho-Sun would pass from job to job, mostly earning his living as a truck driver. And not long after, he would eventually meet his first wife. They married a year later at the young age of 22, their relationship flourishing enough to welcome 2 baby boys into the world. But throughout the years, the young family had its fair share of problems. Local neighbours often overheard the young couple arguing, mainly over their exhaustion of raising 2 sons. And, unfortunately, this situation would end in their divorce shortly after the birth of their second son. After divorcing his wife in 1998, Ho-Sun took the opportunity to move up north, to a small town named Bibongmyeon, found in the Gyeonggi region. The decision was made that he would take both of his sons with him, and with his wife out of the picture, Ho-Sun wanted to fully leave his previous life behind. He hated living in the countryside, and he wanted to give his sons a different, more modern upbringing. It was during these first couple years up north that Ho-Sun eventually met and fell in love with another woman, And once again, he was very quick to marry the new love of his life. And just like clockwork, Ho-Sun's second wife fell pregnant, resulting in many arguments between the two. However, unlike last time, Ho-Sun would now have to work overtime to financially support his family, and this frustrated him greatly. I'm sure you can already guess where this is going. Ho-Sun didn't stick around. He asked for a divorce, left his pregnant wife, and took his 2 sons with him. He also took this second failed marriage as a sign to improve himself, but first he needed more sustainable work. And so, moving 10 miles north, he purchased a small area of land near the Banwell Reservoir, which is our setting for today's case. Raising a small number of livestock on his land, Ho-Sun became somewhat of a farmer, looking after pigs and cattle, along with a few chickens and bees. And to add to this, he also made it a habit of his to pick up stray dogs whenever he came across one. However, this act is not as innocent or kind as it seems. Let me elaborate. This is one of Ho-Sun's most famous pictures. It's one of him with a Siberian husky, and his actions following this image are much darker than one would imagine. Being a farmer, Ho-Sun would have no issue in killing livestock, but very disturbingly, he eventually found new and very dark ways of doing it. And tragically, even these stray dogs would meet their end in his hands. In another picture with this dog, Ho-Sun is seen wearing blue rubber gloves, and his reasoning is malicious, as soon after, this husky dog found itself on his dinner table. It is well documented that many serial killers begin their morbid curiosities with animals, and Ho-Sun was no exception, as a lot of the animals in his care eventually became his victims. Owning a small farm financially supported Ho-Sun for several years, and in the early 2000s he would somehow meet another woman, who he once again hastily married, and luckily this one didn't result in any children. But arguments would once again become a staple in their household, and the new Mrs. Kang found Ho-Sun unbearable to live with, which resulted in divorce number 3. Although very likely his fault, all of these divorces had given Ho-Sun a very negative view on women. He was miserable with his love life, resented women for rejecting him, and hated his former wives for leaving him to raise their children all alone. It was during this time of despair that Ho-Sun met his 4th wife, Hye-jin. And although Ho-Sun held a distorted view on women, he somehow managed to convince this one to marry him. That's not to say that Ho-Sun was socially reclusive, as he was often described as both friendly and very charming, being able to smooth talk his way in or out of any situation. And of course, this gave him an advantage with women. Hye-jin happened to be a business owner herself, managing a massage parlor where she offered services along the lines of Thai and sport massages. And Ho-Sun found this to be particularly attractive, as previously he was the only one to earn money in his relationships. It helped so much that Ho-Sun found himself learning a few things from his wife and taking up regular work within her massage parlor, of course on the side of upkeeping his own farm. So, at least for Ho-Sun, maybe the lucky number was 4. Things seemed to be going very well for the couple. Not only did they resonate off each other's personalities, but they also functioned very well together and learned new skills from each other. More or less, things seemed perfect. And that very much was the case, until tragedy struck the young family in October of 2005. On the 30th of October 2005, Ho-Sun was tending to his livestock, as was the usual for every other day. Hye-jin had plans to see her mother for the afternoon, and not living far from the farm, she picked her up before the two headed out for some coffee. The two soon enough returned to her mother's home, and walking in, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Business as usual. The two boiled a kettle of tea while carrying on with their conversation. But suddenly, as if out of nowhere, the captivating smell of smoke filled the room, and, before they knew it, a raging fire had broken out in the residence. It was fast-travelling and explosive. Very quickly, a large portion of the house was engulfed in flames, and the section of the home that it consumed just so happened to be the room that Hye-jin and her mother were in. And with no time to escape, they were both trapped in the household. Despite emergency services' best efforts, both Hye-jin and her mother perished among the flames. Firefighters found their bodies after taking out the fire. Being called by Hye-jin's distraught family, Ho-Sun rushed to the scene. But upon arriving, Ho-Sun seemed almost unemotional. An initial investigation was conducted at the scene, and the cause of the fire was concluded to be accidental. But this wasn't enough for Hyejin's family. Given the speed, spread, and aggressiveness of it, they were convinced that someone had planted the fire. But after a 6-month investigation, no extra information or evidence could be found to suggest foul play, and ultimately, the investigation was closed. The death of Ho-Sun's wife seemingly allowed him to spiral further out of control, and almost a year after his wife's death, he had taken his frustration out on numerous animals, killing as many as 50 dogs and a staggering number of other livestock. However, this wasn't satisfying Ho-Sun's dark nature, and after giving in to his darkest thoughts and fantasies, Ho-Sun decided to leap from animals to other humans. He eventually found himself leaving his home to venture out in his car and prowl the streets. This was when he spotted Jung Hyun-yoon, a county office employee who was on her way to work. Ho-Sun already knew that he was soft-spoken and a friendly-looking man, and he had extensively planned to use this to his disposal. Pulling up beside Jung Hyun, he offered her a lift to wherever she was going, and seeming well-natured, she accepted his offer. But as soon as she was in his vehicle, Jung Hyun knew she was in trouble. Ho-Sun started to drive in the opposite direction, and after she'd become suspicious, he snatched her phone out of her hands. As Ho-Sun drove to a remote part of the Gyeonggi province, the situation turned violent. Jung Hyun was tragically assaulted, strangled with her own stockings, and murdered. Throughout this entire ordeal, Ho-Sun was calm, collected, well composed. He had been planning this, and for a very long time. He took Jung Hyun's body into a wooded area near his home, and once there, he removed her fingertips to prevent his DNA from being found. After that, she was buried in a shallow grave. Ho-Sun then travelled back home and pretended like nothing happened. He just carried on with his day as usual. He returned to his daily life without any falter, going back to managing his farm and the massage parlour left by his wife. Ho-Sun decided to lie low for a while, scoping out local news and police activity to gauge if any suspicions had been raised. And after concluding that he had successfully gotten away with murder, he realised that he could do whatever he wanted without any consequence. And this idea thrilled him. It thrilled him so much that 2 months later, he took to the streets once again. On the 14th of December 2006, he found himself in the low-lit streets of Gunpo, a small city located just south of Seoul. But this time, he would target the local bars and karaoke clubs. Ho-Sun knew that these would be easy places to find vulnerable women. As in Korea, it is common for karaoke bars to employ hostesses to flirt with their patrons, in hopes to keep their customers around longer and further enjoy their time. Hostesses generally offer patrons nothing more than their own time, but it is at their own discretion what other services they may give once their shifts are over. It is here that Ho-Sun met 45-year-old Kyung-mi Bae, and after catching her attention at the bar, the two shared a couple of drinks together. But Ho-Sun was watching his drink limit, so he could remain sharp for his plans later. And once the night was over, Ho-Sun used his charm to lure her back to his car, with the promise of a few drinks back at his place. And tragically, Kyung-mi accepted. She got into the passenger seat of his car, and the two drove off. And much in the fashion of his first victim, she was taken to a dark, uninhabited area, overpowered and then assaulted. And there was no change to his plans, as just like his first victim, she unfortunately met the same fate. Both of these murders painted a very morbid picture of Ho-Sun's life moving forward. He had found himself a new, sick passion. He felt it gave him great power, and he wanted more. Targeting vulnerable women was his new favourite game, often picking on hostesses or women alone at bus stops. He would frequently charm them with his unmenacing appearance, while talking about his sons and showing pictures of himself with cute dogs, essentially playing on a gentle disposition. Because after all, who'd expect a poor widowed father with 2 sons and who rescues dogs to be someone to avoid? This kind of seduction has been used by serial killers in the past, most notably by American serial killer Ted Bundy. Ted's unassuming and attractive appearance masked his true intentions when approaching his victims, a facade that ended in over 30 counts of homicide, and most likely, even more. As with most serial killers, if they aren't caught, they won't stop. And this was no different for Ho-Sun. His murderous killing spree, continued. Just 10 days after murdering Bae and disposing of her body, Ho-Sun once again took to the streets of Suwon, a city even closer to his hometown. And stalking the entertainment district of the city, he eventually found his next victim, a karaoke bar hostess named Sung-ah Park. Sung-ah humoured this strangely charming man, and throughout the evening, Ho-Sun had manipulated his way into a place of trust with the hostess. They agreed to talking over drinks elsewhere, but Ho-Sun was only going through the motions to get what he desired. He wanted Sung-ah in his car, then assault, then strangulation, and then the woods. And unfortunately for Sung-ah, that is exactly what he achieved. How long was Ho-Sun going to get away with this? All of which was for a fleeting thrill. I wish I could tell you that his reign of terror ended here, and I also wish that I could tell you that he would be caught very soon. But unfortunately, that was very much not the case. As after Ho-Sun claimed his third victim, he would in fact embark upon a 4-day killing spree at the beginning of the new year. It all started on the 3rd of January 2007, with Jung-ja Park, a 52-year-old office worker. And after that, Hae-young Kim, who was a 37-year-old karaoke bar hostess, followed on January the 6th. And next on January the 7th was Mi-young-young, a 21-year-old university student. By the morning of the 8th of January 2007, a total of 7 women had fallen to the hands of Kang Ho-Sun. Every single one of them was charmed with his good looks and smooth talking, and led into a false sense of security. He never appeared or acted how you'd expect a serial killer to behave. Yet, here he was, time after time, getting away with murder. And in sudden fear, Ho-Sun grew scared. He decided to lie low until investigations blew over, likely noticing that his increased appetite had generated too much of a pattern. He focused on his finances instead, because rather conveniently, his wife had an active life insurance policy during the time that she died, and now was as good time as ever for him to make his claim. It turns out that Ho-Sun had taken out life insurance and officially filed his marriage with his late wife only 5 days prior to the fire that killed her. Nevertheless, as suspicious as this would seem, his claim was successful, and his wife's payout cashed in a total of 600 million won, the equivalent of $500,000. Despite the immoral circumstances, Ho-Sun could now live a comfortable life while lying low. He wouldn't even have to work, if he didn't want to. It took almost 2 years for Ho-Sun to build up the courage to continue his dark escapade. He wasn't sure how much police knew, or even if they were still investigating. But in November of 2008, Ho-Sun would finally strike again, and his process was exactly the same as before. His first target was a 48-year-old housewife who lived nearby in Suwon. And on the 9th of November, she unfortunately met her end. And the very next month, on the 19th of December, young Ok-an turned out to be the youngest of his victims. She was 19 years old, and a university student in Ansan. But this time, the consequences to Ho-Sun's actions would be very different, and the death of young Ok-an would finally come with justice. Ho-Sun had technically gotten away with several murders, so why would this one be any different? As young Ok's disappearance turned from days into weeks, her family's concerns grew into desperate fear. And after a few weeks of silence, they had finally called the police to report their daughter as missing. Her family knew where she lived for university, and also knew that she took the bus to uni every day. And fortunately, just 2 months prior to her disappearance, new surveillance cameras were installed right next to the bus stop she frequented every day. It turns out, this was the location Ho-Sun convinced Jung Ok to get in his vehicle, as surveillance cameras spotted a van picking her up. In addition to this, Ho-Sun was becoming both cocky and naive, as this time he tried to withdraw money from her bank account, this resulting in his face being captured by the ATM surveillance camera. Investigators decided to release these images to the public, and not long after, on the 27th of January 2009, officers finally descended upon the farm of Ho-Sun. At long last, his time was up. They had finally caught their serial killer. Ho-Sun was arrested, and his farm formally seized for forensic investigation. While on the property, police found a mountain of evidence that suggested Ho-Sun was involved in the murder of young Ok. And, to their surprise, more evidence was found to suggest that others had died here too. The obvious clue was the charred remains of 2 vehicles, one of which was the truck, which was spotted through surveillance cameras. While inside the farmhouse, investigators would find over 70 pairs of used women's underwear. some of which were soaked in blood, along with several blood-stained outfits. Although Ho-Sun was arrested on suspicion of Young-ok's murder, the blood found on the clothing inside his house did not match her DNA. But upon questioning, he admitted to the murders of 7 other women, spanning from 2006 through to 2008. He would even lead police officers to the sites where he buried their bodies, and for his trial, he was taken to these locations to reenact the crime scenes, where he further elaborated on the details of his crimes. Ho-Sun was almost cocky when talking about these murders, and even found it humorous how he was caught. And Ho-Sun's troubles didn't stop there, as police once again opened up an investigation into the death of his wife and mother-in-law. Given the nature, Ho-Sun's case was extremely popular across national media, and the revelation of Ho-Sun's face was a point of much controversy amongst human rights activists. Many argued that Ho-Sun's face should not have been revealed to the public, and instead should have stayed anonymous through his conviction. In fact, this notion was so prominent that his case ended up changing the law in South Korea, and is the reason that criminals' identities are kept out of the public's eye in order to protect their families. Following his conviction, Kang Ho-Sun formally pleaded guilty to the murder of 8 women, but he denied murdering his wife or his mother-in-law. In trial, he expressed that he felt no remorse in his actions towards these women, and spoke about them as if they were merely pawns for his own desire. He evidently saw all women as a means of self-gratification and pleasure, and this was evident through his multiple wives, mistresses, and girlfriends. All of them were disposable to him. Following his trial, Kang Ho-Sun was officially found guilty over 10 counts of murder, including the murder of his wife and his mother-in-law. He was also found guilty over 1 count of arson, and with capital punishment still legal in South Korea, on the 22nd of April 2009, he was officially sentenced to death for his crimes. However, with South Korea's last execution in 1997, it is unlikely that Ho-Sun will officially be executed. Instead, he is likely to spend many more years rotting behind bars. With South Korean law keeping strict anonymity around suspects and victims, it is hard to properly remember the 10 lives taken by Kang Ho-Sun. But these women were all taken too soon, and most of them had lost their lives through a betrayal of trust. Although Ho-Sun saw them as disposable objects, they were far from it. To many, they were a daughter, a sister, a mother, an aunt, a friend. Kang Ho-Sun's case proves that no matter how friendly or charming someone may seem, it's important to exercise caution and keep yourself safe around those you don't know very well. And that just about wraps up today's case. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this video interesting or you learned something new today, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. So, what are your thoughts on Kang Ho-Sun? Please let me know in the comments down below. Thanks again for watching, folks, and I'll see you again next week. But until that moment arrives, look after each other. Goodbye.